Yeah, my name is Clarence Rhodes, just like a Rhodes Scholar. And how did I get started growing roses, or what got me interested? Was I was trying to make amends with my wife. We lived in Lakewood, Ohio, and I had changed jobs, and my wife was not too happy about that, and I didn't tell her we were going to have to move. And I came home one day and I said, Phyllis, you got to sell this house. We're moving, and she was not very happy. And we came to Portland to look things over and see what it was like, and we just happened to buy a house 2 doors away from a person that was a rose grower, Bill Holman. And I thought, well, one of the things I could do to make amends with her is to make her a rose garden. That's how I got started growing roses. I'm a very competitive person, and not knowing that rose growing was this competitive as far as growing roses and exhibiting roses and things like that. So it was a real challenge for me, and it was the thing that made it interesting to strive to be good at doing this. I grew up in Maryland, Western Maryland, in a very rural country, and my father was a farmer, and we had a big garden, so I knew a lot about growing things, but I didn't know anything about growing roses. And I saw all the roses that Bill Holman had, lived two doors away, and that was my challenge, to be as good as he was at growing roses. Because he was a good rose grower. In the end, he ended up with 600 rose bushes. And in the end, when I ended up with my roses, I had like 250. But I made these rose beds, and I started with a dozen rose bushes. And not knowing what to buy or what to do, how to grow them, all this kind of stuff, without Bill Holman's help. And it started out just from that, and it was a learning process for 40 years of growing roses. The rose is the most known flower in the world. It's probably the oldest. You read some of these articles about roses, and people knew roses something like 40 million years ago, or a long time ago. I have a book that sort of starts out with the history of the rose, and you'd be surprised how the rose became the most favorite flower of the world, really. Rose growing could be a fairly complicated thing. There's different varieties, and one of the things about growing roses, every year there were some new roses hybridized and came on the market, and that's one of the things that kept roses interesting, because these hybridizers are always trying to make another rose better than the best rose that existed. So that was the competition, and particularly in exhibiting roses, that's what you were looking for. That's what made it competitive, um, and that's what people like to do. Roses really don't like cold weather. There are a few roses that are pretty winter hardy, but not a lot. So the big challenge in growing roses in the state of Maine, or in the northern part of the United States, is how do you keep them over the winter? That was the big challenge. Because if you plant them in the spring and they die before the next spring, then you got to start over. And the first thing starting out, if you don't know anything else, you need to cover the bud union of the rose, and you cut your roses back maybe a foot and pile as much soil up around them to keep them from freezing. So that was the first method of using to winterize them. And then I tried some other methods, containers, so I could put the soil up higher. But the end result was, when I built these 2-foot boxes and enclosed all my roses that are in the ground with these 2-foot high boxes with a cover on the top of them, and then I put a plastic cover over top of that, and that way I didn't have to do anything to the soil, mounting the roses, and I just cut all the bushes off 2 feet high. Then I said, well, if I put these in the garage, I can keep them even better, because I thought, well, if I put them in the garage, I have to have some kind of container to got wheels on. So I was in the BJ's one day and I saw these garbage containers. And I said, geez, if I buy this container and cut it off at where the offset was the handles, it'd be the right height. And I could put, and they made a caster assembly that you just attach to the bottom. And over the years, I'd buy half a dozen of them a year, a few more, and I had like 60 of those, and I had 2 rose bushes in each one. Well, I was trying to make it look like California, made them up high, had massive blooms, and in the end, I didn't lose any roses from winter loss. So I felt I was really successful at doing that, and I told a lot of people about it, showed a lot of people about it, and there were other people that were doing the same thing, but just in a different manner. How do you do it? After you've had enough experience at this, I didn't care whether they died or not. They died. I just replaced them with some other different roses, and it was a reason to have roses that maybe you would have never had before. Simply we're just replacing it, and then every year, being a challenge that it was, you'd make another rose bed or make a bigger garden, and just to be competitive. Well, the person Bill Holman, that lived 2 doors away from me, him and Ken Irvine, his friend, got the Maine Rose Society started. The rose world is a big world, and the only closest rose society was in Massachusetts, and they had belonged to the Massachusetts, or the Rose Society, which was the name of it was the New England Rose Society. So every month the meeting, they had to drive to Boston, and they got tired of doing this after a couple years, and then Bill decided, well, maybe we should make a Maine Rose Society right here in Maine, and we won't have to drive to Boston every week, and we'll have our own Rose Society, and we'll get enough people involved to grow roses, and that's what happened. And actually, the American Rose Society has the country divided up into regions, and this region in the Northeast was called the New England region for the Rose Society. And at that time there was only one Rose Society, and that was in Boston, and the name of the Rose Society was the New England Rose Society. And then when Bill Holman started the Maine Rose Society, they just gave it the name of the Maine Rose Society, and now there was a conflict with the New England Rose Society and the New England District. So then there was a whole bunch of rearrangements. They got the district changed to instead of being the New England District, it became the Yankee District, because the New England Rose Society wouldn't change their name, and all these kind of things that go, and you work out all these problems, and it ended up that every state in New England had a Rose Society except Vermont, and I think Massachusetts had two Rose Societies. Because rose growing, maybe from the 50s, rose growing has always been big, because the American Rose Society got the rose to be made the national floral emblem of the United States. Well, one time the American Rose Society had, I think it was like almost 30,000 members, and now maybe there's only 6 or 7 or 8,000. And it's been down like that for quite a while. It's like any of these other organizations, they have some lifespan to them. And yeah, I was the president of the Maine Rose Society one term, and my wife was also the president and she was the first woman president of the Maine Rose Society. The Rose Society printed a newsletter, and Mrs. Holman, Bill Holman's wife, she was an office worker, and she was a typist, and so she used to type these and give them to your father, And then he had a mimeograph machine, and he then printed all, made all, and then they would come back to Holman's house, and then we'd have these meetings where then we'd staple them all together and put the newsletter together. And this was done monthly. It was a lot of work, but people had a lot of fun doing great social activities and people getting together. And that's one of the things that makes societies like that successful and people wanting to belong, because they're having a good time doing all this stuff. And that's the competitive thing about growing roses, was the rose show. To growing good roses, getting the roses that make good exhibitors and stuff like that. And you need a refrigerator. And again, depending on how many roses that you have, to cut your roses and store them to be able to take them to the rose show, because you need to cut them when you think they're going to be at their very peak exhibiting form. And some of them, after you cut them, they will open more. You have to learn which ones that open after they're cut, which ones hold their form better, which ones like or don't like refrigeration and stuff like that. Our son went to Shepherd's High School, so my wife knew all these priests and everything that ran Shepherd's High School, and so she got the Shepherd's High School to rent the Maine Rose Society, their auditorium, and that's when we had our best rose shows, because it was a great place. It was always the same place, and had people waiting to come to the Rose Society, because we used to sell all the roses when the rose show ended. People just walk around and gather up whatever they wanted, and I don't know what we charged, 50 cents a rose or something like that. And we had a line of people at the end of the show to wait just to get in to get all these roses, because sometimes rose show we'd have 600 or 700 roses exhibited, which is a lot of roses. But you got to set all this up. You got to get all the bases full of water, and it takes a day to get it all put together, and all the labels, which roses go where, and and then you have all these different classes of roses to make sure you get them in the right class and all that kind of stuff, and it makes it competitive, and you're always looking to see, was I a winner? After the rose show is judged, everything, and the show is open to the public, and you go around and look to see how many winners you had. Roses primarily are judged on a hybrid tea rose, with a rose that's very symmetrical with a high pointed center. If you look at all the roses in the supermarkets and things like that people buy for their wives and friends like that, even though they're small, they are a hybrid tea form to them. And that was classic rose form for exhibiting roses. Then other roses, these old garden roses, which open up, and some of them are flat, some of them have as many as 100 petals, some have only 5 petals. So there's all these different categories to put different kind of roses in to have it. And that was a learning process. It's some little thing, some little spot on a petal or something like that. If these were really very good roses, and they were very hard to distinguish between the two of them. Some had a little spot where maybe a bug ate a little edge of the leaf, or a little mold spot or something like that. That could be the deciding factor whether it was a winner or not. The winner in each one of these classes was always called the queen. And the winner of the hybrid tea class was the queen of the rose show. And that was the objective, to get. And at that time, the rose world was a man's world. It wasn't women. The women was sort of taken over the years. Not taken over, but they sort of were running the rose shows after that. But that was the object, is to win the queen of the show. And then there was the second prize was the king of the show, and then the third prize was the princess of the show. And these were the objectives that you were trying to accomplish. I won a few queens, and with my job where I was doing all this traveling, and I wasn't home during the week, and sometimes I was gone for 2 or 3 weeks, and it's very difficult to maintain your rose garden and to things that you need to do to grow a queen to win a rose show. I became a accredited rose judge for the American Rose Society. They're all different classifications of roses, and you had to have all these different classifications for the roses, and you had, the exhibitor had to make sure he put the roses in the right class, or otherwise they got disqualified and stuff like that. All these rules, it's like everything that's competitive has rules, and being competitive, that's what makes things better. You're always trying to do something better, improvement, and every year there are new roses that come out that are hybridized, and again, it takes some of the things that you learn, that once a hybridizer pollinates a rose, it takes it almost 10 years, if it's a good rose, to get to the market. Being a rose judge, all these rose shows need judges, so if you're a good judge and you get a good name for being a good judge, these people that are running these rose shows, they know who you are after a period of time, and they call you up and say, would you come and judge our rose show for us? Because their own growers, they're exhibitors, and at that time you could not, if you were an exhibitor, you couldn't judge the rose show. So we took a week's vacation twice a year to go to different rose shows around the country, because I always was getting asked to judge rose shows, and she loves it. It was a great thing for her to travel, because she liked to travel and do a lot of things. There is a World Federation of Rose Societies, and each country has a rose society, and the World Federation of Rose Society, I think they held a rose convention, a world convention every 2 years or whatever it was, and it would be a big rose show, and it would be a big event. So the last one we went to, my wife, being Irish as she was, she wanted to go to Ireland, and she had been there 2 or 3 times already. And there was a rose, international rose show in Belfast, Ireland. And I said, Phyllis, why don't you take me to Ireland to a rose show? Just give me the bill. She says, okay. And she worked on this for 6 months to get all everything in order, and it was a great week vacation, and then she made this trip. There was a fellow that lived in Ireland. He was a great rose grower, and he came to the United States many times, and his name was Sean McCann, and we knew him very well, and she knew him very well, and she communicated with him on all this trip. But then Sean's son was in the travel business, and after this week's at the rose show, we had a 2-week tour of Ireland. Came all the way down the east side of Ireland, around the bottom, up the west side, and for 2 weeks all we did was stay in castles and visit rose gardens for 2 weeks. I mean, you couldn't make up something if you didn't have some reason to do this, or something that motivated you to. And it was great. It was, and then we had like at least 25 or 30 or 40 years of this. And, you go to these national shows and international shows, you get to meet people from all over the world. Really, and my wife loved that. She was a great traveler, and she was a people person. But it was a fun thing. It was a family thing. The people were all nice people, and they all had the same goal to reach, to win the queen of the show, and who could grow the best roses. And that's one of the things, even in commerce, that the thing that improves things is competition. It became probably the very biggest social thing in our lives, because it was always changing. It was something, sometimes you get in some of these things that you do the same thing over and over and over again. But this rose thing was always continuously changing, going to different cities to go to rose shows, new roses every year, and you get to see if they, how they grow and see how successful you can be at growing them, and it was a challenge. Well, probably the best places in this country to grow roses is California, uh, Oregon, and Washington states. The climate is right. On the East Coast, New Jersey, around through there, because roses don't like really real hot weather, or they don't like cold weather. So in my job, I travel all over the country just working, and I'd be in places where I'd find out if there was a rose season or rose shows going on. So I'd find the people, and then I'd volunteer to be a judge at these shows and see how roses grow around the country and in different climates and different parts of the country, and that was all part of the learning too. And just how some of the stuff carries on. There was a family that just moved next door to me in the last month, and a young couple, and I was talking to the lady the other day, and she said something about someone in the neighborhood. Said, this is really a nice neighborhood. And I said, it really is. And she said, well, the lady that I was talking with says, oh, you live next to the rose guy. And I haven't had any roses out there for 10 years or more. So got a real reputation for growing roses.